We'll advance this vision, guided by a sense of enlightened self-interest that has long animated U.S. leadership at its best. We helped build the international order after World War II and invested in the progress of other nations and people because we recognized that it would serve humanity's interest, but also our own. We understood that even as the most powerful nation on earth, forging shared global rules, accepting certain constraints, and supporting the success of others would ultimately make the American people more prosperous, more peaceful, more secure. It still does. Indeed, America's enlightened self-interest in preserving and strengthening this order has never been greater.
Yes, he's correct. They've only worked with others when it benefited them. And as for the international order, well, that just means the US rules that everyone else has to stick to. But the US can break them whenever it suits them. And the US are desperate to hold on to it.
Now, our competitors have a fundamentally different vision. They see a world defined by a single imperative: regime preservation and enrichment. A world where authoritarians are free to control, coerce, and crush their people, their neighbors, and anyone else standing in the way of this all-consuming goal.
He gets this part completely wrong. The US competitors, as he likes to call them, just want a system where others have a seat at the table in shaping the rules, not just the US alone.
We're upgrading infrastructure, boosting research, bolstering the key industries and technologies of the 21st century, recharging our manufacturing base, leading the global energy transition.
He says the US are leading the global energy transition. I'm not so sure where he's getting this information from. China is far, far ahead of the rest of the world with regards to clean energy transition. The US don't even come close.
We're transforming the G7 into the steering committee for the world's most advanced democracies, combining our political and economic muscle to not only address the issues affecting our people, but also to offer countries outside the G7 better ways to deliver for their people.
As the BRICS alliance grows, the G7 is actually becoming less and less relevant and will continue to do so. In fact, recently, G7 share of the global economy has shrank, while the BRICS share of the global economy has increased.
We've raised the level of ambition in our relationship with the European Union. Together, we account for 40% of the global economy. We're using that power to shape our technological and economic future to reflect our shared democratic values.
What he actually means is by cutting the EU off from low-cost Russian energy and destroying the EU-China trade agreement, the EU are now even more of a vassal of the US than ever before.
We agreed to new basing and posture arrangements with allies Australia and the Philippines. The US-India strategic partnership has never been more dynamic, as we team up on everything from advanced semiconductors to defense cooperation. And just a few days ago, in Hanoi, President Biden cemented a new comprehensive strategic partnership with Vietnam.
Yeah, recruiting other countries with bribes and other enticements to act as proxies to provoke a war with China. Quite amazing that they think they will turn India and Vietnam against China.
We've galvanized regional integration. In the Middle East, we've deepened both recent and decades-old relations between Israel and Arab states, and we're working to foster new ones, including with Saudi Arabia.
Seems that the Middle East are moving away from the influence of the US and more towards deepening trade and cooperation with China, so not quite sure how he sees the US are deepening relationships.
Because of the remarkable bravery and resilience of the Ukrainian people and our support, Putin's war continues to be a strategic failure for Russia. Our goal is to ensure Ukraine not only survives, but thrives as a vibrant, prosperous democracy, so that Ukrainians can write their own future and stand on their own.
Due to US actions, they have sent over 400,000 Ukrainians to the slaughter. A number of US politicians have even admitted that it's a proxy war against Russia.
When Russia cut off oil and gas supplies to Europe in the winter to try to freeze countries out of supporting Ukraine, Japan and Korea joined America's leading liquefied natural gas producers to ensure European countries had the energy needed to keep their homes warm throughout the winter. Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand are now regular and active participants in NATO meetings. Meanwhile, European countries, Canada, and others have joined our allies and partners in Asia in sharpening their tools to push back against the PRC's economic coercion.
Russia did not cut off oil and gas to Europe, US blew up Nord Stream, and the EU imposed a ban on Russian energy, even though they are buying more than ever through third parties and paying a premium for it. It's also been pretty good for the US LNG industry too.
We created a new security partnership, AUKUS, with Australia and the United Kingdom to build modern nuclear-powered submarines and to advance our joint work on AI, quantum computing, and other cutting-edge technologies.
They managed to get Australia to spend tens of billions of dollars on submarines to counter a threat that doesn't exist, hence filling the pockets of the US military-industrial complex. A win-win for the US.
We're building new coalitions to tackle the toughest shared challenges of our time, like closing the global infrastructure gap. Now, pretty much everywhere I go, I hear from countries about projects that are environmentally destructive and poorly built, that import or abuse workers, that foster corruption and burden them with unsustainable debt. Of course, countries would prefer transparent, high-quality, environmentally sound investments. They don't just always have a choice. We're working with our G7 partners to give them a choice.
Here, he's having a pop at China's Belt and Road, which has built large amounts of infrastructure for African and other developing countries. Even countries like Iraq and Afghanistan that have been destroyed by US wars. The US can't even manage to build new infrastructure at home, so how are they going to build it abroad? The initiatives they announce are all hot air that amount to nothing. And just to think, 10 or so years ago, China invited the US to take part in the Belt and Road project, yet according to John Kerry, the proposal was not even considered.
And just this past week, at the G20, President Biden and Indian Prime Minister Modi announced another ambitious transportation, energy, and technology corridor that will connect the ports of Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, France, Germany, Italy, the EU will team up with the US and India to turbocharge clean energy production, digital connectivity, and strengthen critical supply chains across the region. These and other efforts to build infrastructure in developing countries are ultimately investments in our own future.
I'll believe this when I see it.
We must put our hand on the rudder of history and chart a path forward, guided by the things that are certain, even in uncertain times. Our principles, our partners, our vision for where we want to go. So that when the fog lifts, the world that emerges tilts toward freedom, toward peace, toward an international community capable of rising to the challenges of this time. No one understands this better than President Biden. And America is in a significantly stronger position in the world than it was 2.5 years ago because of the actions that he's taken.
The US in a stronger position? Really?
I'm convinced that decades from now, when the history of this period is written, maybe by some of you, it will show that the way we acted, decisively, strategically, with humility and confidence, to reimagine the power and purpose of U.S. diplomacy, we secured America's future, we delivered for our people, we laid the foundation for a more free, a more open, a more prosperous era for the American people and for people around the world.
I very much doubt that. I'm really not sure how Anthony Blinken stood there and delivered that speech with a straight face. His nose should be as long as Pinocchio's. What amazes me is he thinks the US are the good guys, even though since the end of the Second World War they have caused endless trouble around the world, overthrown numerous governments, invaded many countries, killed millions and displaced even more, and all in the name of freedom and democracy. Well, I think if this is the US's idea of freedom and democracy, then it's way past time for something new. These are my own views. I'd really like to hear yours. The world is changing very quickly and I hope for the better. I would really appreciate knowing your views, so consider leaving a comment. I invite constructive comments and good, polite conversation. Comments that are not constructive or insulting will be deleted. If you like this video, please consider hitting the like button, and if you like my content, consider becoming a member of the channel in order to support me so that I can keep making this content. However, as always, for now, take care.